When a notoriously outspoken television personality decides to corner a widely admired Hollywood star during a live broadcast, the results are not always what they expect. What unfolded on that episode became a moment that stunned audiences, rattled the studio, and instantly shifted the balance of power on air. We find ourselves struggling to maintain control as Johnny Depp calmly delivered remarks that cut deeper than any raised voice ever could, creating one of the most uncomfortable exchanges daytime television had seen in years. The show had been facing declining viewership for quite some time, and behind the scenes there was growing pressure to create a moment that would reignite public interest. When Depp's team suggested an appearance to promote his latest film, producers initially saw it as a chance to focus on his return to creative work and his passion for storytelling. Behar, however, viewed it differently. Known for her blunt opinions and willingness to push boundaries, she believed a more aggressive approach would generate the kind of attention the show desperately needed. In the days leading up to the broadcast, the agreed-upon outline quietly unraveled. While the segment was meant to highlight Depp's career and upcoming project, Behar had privately prepared a list of confrontational talking points. She was convinced that catching him off guard would result in a viral moment, regardless of how uncomfortable it might become. The rest of the panel seemed largely unaware of just how far she intended to go. When Depp entered the studio, the atmosphere initially felt warm and welcoming. The audience applauded enthusiastically as he greeted them with an easy smile, taking a moment to acknowledge their support. He appeared relaxed and appreciative, projecting a calm confidence that immediately softened the room. Even members of the crew who had been uncertain about his appearance couldn't help but notice his genuine composure. Behar, by contrast, appeared restless. Longtime viewers could sense what was coming from her expression alone. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure of the direction the conversation was about to take. As soon as the cameras went live, Behar skipped any sense of cordial introduction and leaned forward, her tone sharp and deliberate. She framed Depp's recent years as a dramatic downfall, painting him as someone attempting to crawl back from public disgrace. A collective gasp rippled through the studio. This was not the discussion anyone had anticipated. Depp's publicist immediately stiffened, eyes darting toward the production team. Depp himself, however, did not react with anger or surprise. He remained composed, a faint, knowing smile resting on his face as if he had already predicted the turn the conversation would take. He responded evenly, pointing out the contrast between the expected discussion about film and the accusatory tone being directed at him. His voice remained steady, neither defensive nor apologetic, which only seemed to irritate Behar further. Interpreting his restraint as weakness, she pressed harder, declaring his reputation ruined and his career effectively finished, insisting that he owed the public some form of accountability. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Cameras focused closely on Depp, anticipating a flash of frustration or a sharp retort. Instead, his expression shifted into something closer to bemused disbelief. When he spoke again, his delivery carried the dramatic flair audiences recognized from his performances, but it was restrained and deliberate. He commented on the hostility of the exchange, suggesting that the aggression on display felt misplaced and driven by something beyond the topic at hand. A low murmur spread through the audience, punctuated by a few uneasy laughs. The remark landed cleanly, and for a brief moment, Behar appeared visibly shaken. Her face flushed, but she refused to retreat. Rather than de-escalate, she doubled down, insisting that her approach was rooted in serious inquiry and public interest. She referenced his legal battles and framed her comments as necessary scrutiny rather than personal attack. Depp leaned back comfortably, unfazed. He spoke about his decades in the industry, explaining that he had encountered every type of interviewer imaginable. With calm certainty, he stated that the exchange unfolding had little to do with genuine journalism. His words were measured but unmistakably pointed, and the implication was impossible to ignore. At this point, the rest of the panel was clearly uncomfortable. One of the co-hosts attempted to redirect the discussion toward Depp's upcoming film, offering a lifeline that might have restored balance to the segment. Behar waved her off dismissively, intent on continuing her line of attack. When she laughed in response to his comment about the exchange feeling personal, the sound rang hollow. It lacked ease or confidence, betraying the strain beneath her composure. The moment had slipped beyond her control, and the audience could sense it. What was meant to be a calculated ambush had transformed into a public unraveling, with Depp maintaining his calm while the host appeared increasingly rattled. Johnny was told that every aspect of his existence had been exposed for years, that his private struggles had long since become public property. She insisted he could not selectively embrace publicity when it suited him and then claim mistreatment when scrutiny followed. According to her, difficult conversations were simply part of the territory. Depp's expression shifted, his smile broadening slightly, and for a brief second he appeared almost amused by her determination to push forward. He acknowledged that one part of her statement was accurate. He had lived under constant public observation for decades, and that experience had taught him a great deal about human behavior. One lesson, he explained, stood out above all others. When someone invests enormous energy into tearing another person down, it often reveals far more about the person doing the attacking than the one on the receiving end. The studio grew eerily quiet, the audience fully absorbed in the unexpected intensity of the exchange unfolding before them. Behar sensed the momentum slipping from her grasp. Rather than recalibrating, she chose to escalate. Her voice sharpened as she challenged him, bristling at the implication that her character was being questioned. She began to speak rapidly, but before she could complete her thought, Depp raised his hand. The gesture was controlled and respectful, yet firm enough to halt her mid-sentence. He stated calmly that the conversation had reached a critical moment, one that required her to decide what kind of program she intended to host. The silence that followed was overwhelming. The room seemed suspended in time, cameras fixed, crew members unsure whether they were witnessing a career-defining broadcast or a spectacular collapse. Behar hesitated, her expression betraying uncertainty as she struggled to find footing. Depp continued without raising his voice, though there was a noticeable shift in his tone. He explained that he had accepted the invitation, believing the discussion would revolve around his creative work. Instead, it had become clear that the true objective was to provoke an emotional breakdown on air. He remarked that this strategy rested on a flawed assumption about who he was and how he handled confrontation. Behar eventually responded, her words edged with defensiveness. She asserted her professional credentials, citing decades of experience speaking with high-profile figures. Moments, she insisted, did not need to be manufactured. They emerged naturally when honesty was present. So Depp repeated her self-description, the faint surprise in his voice suggesting he found the label ironic. He clarified that hosting a daytime talk show centered on pop culture and political commentary fell under entertainment, not investigative reporting. Attempting to cloak personal hostility behind the banner of journalism, he added, revealed more than perhaps intended. The audience remained transfixed, many leaning forward, sensing they were witnessing a rare display of verbal restraint paired with unmistakable precision. What had begun as an ambush had evolved into something far more compelling. Depp navigated the confrontation with composure, deflecting each attempt to provoke him while maintaining control of the narrative. Several audience members exchanged glances, clearly impressed by how effortlessly he redirected the energy in the room. One of the other hosts attempted once again to shift the discussion, suggesting a return to the topic of Depp's latest film and what inspired him to take on the role. Behar dismissed the interruption outright, convinced that the exchange was far from finished. She insisted that Depp was attempting to reverse roles by criticizing her, and she made it clear she had no intention of backing down. Depp laughed, the sound light and genuine, devoid of malice. He explained that he had not launched a personal attack. Instead, he had merely observed that her line of questioning lacked professionalism and appeared driven by motives unrelated to genuine curiosity about his work. If she perceived that observation as an attack, he said, it only reinforced the notion that the issue was personal for her. Sir, Behar's face flushed deeply as her voice rose. She shifted her focus to his return to Hollywood, accusing him of expecting forgiveness and acceptance without accountability. The room tightened once more as the weight of her words settled over the audience. Depp responded quietly, but his words carried across the studio with clarity. He stated that the heart of the matter had finally surfaced. The frustration he suggested had little to do with his professional conduct. It stemmed from the belief that he deserved punishment. The fact that he continued to work, create, and receive invitations appeared to be the true source of her anger. The impact of his statement was immediate. Behar leaned back in her chair, visibly shaken, her expression revealing the effort required to assemble a response that would not validate the observation he had just made. The remaining hosts avoided looking in Behar's direction, their gazes fixed on cue cards, monitors, or anywhere else that allowed them to escape the tension filling the studio. The discomfort was unmistakable. Lord Depp continued speaking, his tone steady but deliberate, explaining that what appeared to be unfolding went far beyond a simple interview. In his view, she had positioned herself as a self-appointed judge within the entertainment world, deciding who was worthy of forgiveness and who should remain condemned. What seemed to frustrate her most, he suggested, was that the broader public did not necessarily share her verdicts. Behar erupted, her restraint finally collapsing. She snapped back that she had no intention of being analyzed and insisted that she was fully entitled to challenge her guests. She implied that if he found such scrutiny unbearable, perhaps public interviews were not for him. Depp responded quietly, his voice dropping low enough that the audience leaned in instinctively to catch every word. He explained that he had endured far more rigorous questioning from seasoned reporters who managed to probe without injecting personal hostility. What she was doing, he said, did not qualify as tough inquiry. It crossed into cruelty, and her inability to recognize the difference was troubling. The cameras captured her reaction in unforgiving detail. Her expression shifted rapidly from irritation to visible embarrassment, then into something resembling panic. She had clearly expected him to lash out or lose composure. Instead, he dismantled her approach piece by piece, never raising his voice, never appearing rattled. The imbalance was striking. Depp went on, broadening his focus beyond Behar to include the audience and everyone watching at home. He suggested that someone had likely encouraged her to believe that hostility would translate into compelling television. In doing so, she had mistaken aggression for intellect. She seemed convinced that relentless pressure would cause him to break, allowing her to appear bold and fearless. In reality, he said, there was nothing brave about blindsiding a guest on a platform entirely under her control. It was the opposite, a display of insecurity rather than strength. The studio fell into absolute silence. Even the other hosts appeared frozen, transfixed by the exchange. Behar glanced around, clearly searching for backup, but none came. Her colleagues remained still, unwilling or unable to intervene. Depp continued, now leaning slightly forward, emphasizing that the situation extended beyond performance or ratings. He spoke about basic humanity, about the responsibility that came with inviting someone into a space that claimed to value conversation. Behar attempted to speak, but no words emerged. For someone accustomed to dominating discussions, the loss of language was striking. The silence stretched, growing heavier by the second. It became clear that control had slipped entirely from her grasp. Not just of the interview, but of the entire room. Depp finally spoke again, explaining that he had arrived hoping to discuss his work, to engage thoughtfully with viewers, and to participate in a meaningful exchange. Instead, he had been met with something that felt deeply personal, cloaked in the appearance of professionalism. He stated plainly that audiences deserved more respect than that, and that she herself was capable of better, even if she had momentarily forgotten it. His words lingered in the air, dense and inescapable. Behar remained motionless, her usual sharpness nowhere to be found. Each passing second of silence amplified the sense that she was unprepared for how completely the moment had turned against her. Camera operators seized every detail, capturing the tightening of her jaw, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the visible strain of someone realizing they had miscalculated. Behind the scenes, producers gestured urgently, signaling for a commercial break that might interrupt the unraveling. Either she failed to notice or refused to acknowledge the escape being offered. Pride, stubbornness, or sheer disbelief kept her seated. Instead of retreating, she pressed forward, recommitting to the same strategy that had already collapsed. Her voice trembled as she accused Depp of portraying himself as a victim, Insisting that viewers could see through him, she claimed that charm could not conceal truth indefinitely. Indefinitely. The moment those words landed, the atmosphere shifted sharply. Depp's demeanor changed. The relaxed patience he had maintained disappeared, replaced by something far more severe. When he spoke again, his voice was precise and unyielding, commanding immediate attention. He told her that making such an accusation publicly, without offering any concrete examples, crossed a serious line. That kind of statement, he said, did not belong to journalism or entertainment. It ventured into dangerous territory. He explained that believing such remarks carried no consequences suggested she had been insulated from accountability for far too long. Surrounded by agreement and affirmation, she had lost touch with how the real world operated. As the weight of his words settled in, Behar's face drained of color. The implications were unmistakable, and the realization appeared to hit her all at once. She glanced back toward the producers once more, this time with unmistakable desperation etched across her face. It was the look of someone searching for an exit that no longer existed. Depp, however, showed no intention of letting the moment pass. He explained that what made the situation especially disheartening was the squandered opportunity it represented. She had been given a chance to engage in a meaningful exchange with someone who had spent decades navigating the highs and lows of the industry, someone who could have spoken about creativity, endurance, and the discipline behind the craft. Instead, she had opted for cheap provocation, believing that hostility would project strength. He continued by saying that the only thing accomplished was the exposure of a willingness to abandon basic decency in pursuit of a fleeting surge of attention. The audience was fully absorbed now, several people nodding subtly as his words resonated. Behar scanned the room again, silently pleading for assistance, but her co-hosts avoided her gaze, unwilling to involve themselves further. Depp shifted his focus toward the cameras, addressing viewers directly. He spoke about the expectation that guests be treated with courtesy, that questions be asked with thoughtfulness, and that conversations aim for substance rather than manufactured conflict. What had unfolded, he explained, was the result of mistaking cruelty for bravery, a confusion that carried consequences. Behar finally managed to respond, but her voice emerged shrill and frantic. She objected loudly, insisting that she alone controlled the show and had every right to run it as she pleased. Depp replied evenly, pointing out that the program ultimately belonged to the network, the sponsors, and the audience. Any authority she held was temporary, and based on what had transpired, that arrangement appeared increasingly fragile. The shock on her face suggested that the comment had landed painfully close to reality. Reports of dwindling ratings and uneasy advertisers had clearly not been unfounded, and his casual reference to her unstable footing struck a nerve. Depp continued, observing that she had grown so accustomed to harshness that she no longer recognized anything else. Her career, he said, had been built on bluntness, but somewhere along the way, honesty had become indistinguishable from hostility. Now, confronted with someone unwilling to be intimidated, she seemed unsure how to proceed. Behar stood abruptly, her chair skidding backward with enough force to nearly topple nearby equipment. She declared that she would not remain seated for what she perceived as an attack. Depp, still seated and composed, reminded her that she had extended the invitation. Leaving would mean abandoning her own program, an option available to her if she chose it. The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. She appeared to realize she was cornered. Walking away would signal weakness and lack of professionalism, while staying meant enduring a public unraveling of her authority. Neither option spared her humiliation, but retreat would make it unmistakable. She lowered herself back into her chair, her attempt to reclaim command visibly strained. She announced a commercial break, her voice wavering. Depp responded firmly that the conversation was not finished. The balance of power had shifted so dramatically that even the crew hesitated. No one moved. The cameras continued recording as he delivered words that would soon circulate everywhere. He told her to remember the moment, his voice carrying the measured intensity of a seasoned performer. He urged her to remember what it felt like to confront the consequences of habitual cruelty. He suggested that one day, when she questioned why her influence had faded, why opportunities dried up, and why familiar voices no longer returned her calls, She would recall this day and understand where the decline began. Behar, finally. Tears spilled freely as she shouted for the cameras to stop, declaring the interview finished. But the damage had already been done. The studio descended into disorder as producers scrambled to regain control and salvage what they could. Footyad. Amid the chaos, Depp remained still, seated calmly, appearing less like a combatant and more like someone who had just demonstrated how to confront hostility without surrendering dignity. Within hours, the footage would spread rapidly online. By nightfall, her name would dominate conversations for reasons she had never intended. The irony was unmistakable. In attempting to undermine someone else's reputation, she had instead dismantled her own standing in a way that could not easily be repaired. It all stemmed from ignoring a fundamental principle of television and conversation alike. When confronting a seasoned performer, one should always be prepared for them to perform in return.